Welcome. And thank you all for joining us for another live episode of Teachers for Teachers. That's you, moms and dads. I'm Dr. Dejana, and I'm here with Dr. Leah, who will be joining us momentarily. And we're so excited to welcome you to our conversation with a really cool special guest. Say hello, Leah.
Hello, and thank you for your patience with us. I was just explaining to the gang that I am my own tech support today. In typical 2020 style, I am now quarantining because I had firsthand exposure to someone who tested positive. So it's nice to be Zooming with everyone because this will be, not that it's that different. I was pretty much under quarantine and going out on Sunday mornings to do grocery shopping, and I will just drop that for the rest of it. Nothing really changed except I don't get to see the kids for a few days. But we have a guest today from NCORBS again, and I'm really happy to have him join. Bob Capriles, which is a really easy name to remember now that it's been explained. And you're explaining how to say your name really says a lot about the way you are as a teacher. Because, and as you explained to us, you do the same thing in front of the classroom, giving kids a reference point that helps them remember something, whether it's, Tim Griffith often joins us and he does it through music, but having something like the description. So Bob said to us that you think about those pants that don't quite go to the ankles, the capris, and he is without capris, so he is Capriles. So we will all be able to remember your name for many years to come, I'm sure, because of that great story. So Bob, or Dejana, before we get started on the conversation, do you want to bring our panel in too?
Yeah, I would love to introduce everybody who's joining us today. Let's welcome Anne McMullen. Say hello, Anne.
Hi, Dejana. Great to be with all of you today. So appreciated.
Happy to have you. Anne is an accomplished and respected education consultant based in Los Angeles. She is the project director of COSIN's Empowered Superintendents Program and author of a book, go check it out, Life Lessons in Leadership. We're also welcoming Dr. Mark Riddle to the conversation. Go ahead and say hello.
Hey, the water's very still in Venice today.
I love it. Mark has degrees in music, theology, and sociology and works at West Coast University. He's also a resident of Los Angeles. So happy to have them joining the conversation. And then I do want to give you a little background information on our guest today, which is Bob. Bob, go ahead and say hi just so they can put a face with who I'm talking about.
Hello.
There you are. Bob is a passionate mathematics educator currently teaching Project Lead the Way's Digital Electronics, Project Lead the Way's Principles of Engineering courses, and a mixed high school Algebra 1 and Geometry course. Hello, that sounds like a lot to me. He's also taught Algebra 2, Geometry, Math Analysis. I mean, you name it, Bob's probably taught it or has the capability to teach it. He's driven by the knowledge that all students can learn math and engineering. Welcome, Bob, to the conversation.
Well, thank you for having me today. I'm really excited to be here. And I should actually say, I guess I did hear from Leah. She said she got my latest information off of LinkedIn. I think maybe that tells me I need to go out and update it a little bit, because this year I am teaching all Project Lead the Way classes. I'm actually not even have an opportunity to teach math this year. I'm teaching a course which is brand new to Project Lead the Way this year called Engineering Essentials, in addition to digital electronics and principles of engineering. So I've got lots of students who are delving into the world of project-based learning, and a little less of this traditional things. But boy, what a wild world it is to teach that in the world of remote learning.
Absolutely. I mean, speaking of that, we kind of wanted to start off with asking you, what's your evaluation of the current education situation, remote learning, virtual learning, hybrid learning, that we've been experiencing over the last 8 months in this pandemic?
Well, I think you're not going to find any teacher who's not going to say they miss having their students in the classroom and having that personal connection. When I was going through my teacher training, I had my first supervisor out of San Jose State. By the way, I'm I think all of you are in Southern California. I'm up in Northern California in Santa Clara County. And so my supervisor at San Jose State, he told me after he came and observed me, I think the first time, he says, you want to greet your students at the door every day. You just want to make that connection. And I took that to heart. And so I greet my students. I've always greeted my students with a handshake. And the students who don't want to give me a handshake, we either do a fist bump or an arm bash or something to make that physical contact. We get to make eye-to-eye contact. And so I miss that. I don't get to see my students. And even, in March last spring, as we were, I'm trying to figure out, well, how am I going to do this? And eventually it was like, okay, well, I'll do an air high five. I'm not touching you, but I'm doing an air high five just before we went into the shelter in place in March. And so I really miss that. If you talk with my colleagues and I as well, we're, at least at my school, we're using Zoom. And so, it's strange because students have such a variety of connectivity. And I really think that's what's driving a lot of this. And so a lot of my colleagues go, it's so weird because we're so used to having this chitter chatter in the classroom. The kids walk in, they start talking with each other. And then, then you call them to order and you kind of get going with school, or the bell calls them. Well, we have no bells. I actually must tell one on myself. I'm still trying to figure out the bell schedule with the Zoom, with our remote learning. I let one of my classes out twice within a couple of weeks, 15 minutes early, because I'd lost track of when was this class supposed to get out? And then I'm waiting for my next class. I'm going, why aren't these kids showing up? And I'm like, oh, geez, I did it again, And so there are things like that, but my colleagues will tell you, it's so hard, and it's a pleasure today to be able to see your faces. So many of my kids don't have their cameras on. And some people go, oh, you should have your students have your cameras on. Well, if my students have their cameras on, they can't hear me because their internet connection is so poor that their audio becomes incredibly choppy when they turn their video on. So I tell my students, you don't have to have your video on, because I'd rather have you hear me and be able to see some of the things that we're presenting than to have you have this choppy internet connection and not be able to hear a thing. And I've experienced it the other way, where I'll ask a student and my internet's working okay, but the student's internet's so poor, I can't even make out the words they're saying. And so that's hard. But on the plus side, one of the things that I've loved about having Zoom is that there's a way that students can send direct chat messages to me. And, that social embarrassment of asking a question and being on the spot in the classroom and, somebody's going to judge me for having this weird question. Well, students can now ask me that direct message. They can ask that question, and then I can answer it without, anonymously going, well, one of your classmates asked this. I think it's a really great question. Let me address it. The student gets acknowledged that their question was heard. The students hear the answer, which is appropriate for everybody. And it allows us to make some other connections maybe we wouldn't have in an in-person classroom. So, there are pluses and minuses of this. Through it all, you try to keep an upbeat attitude and have the kids just be okay with where they're at every day. And I ask them to do that too at the beginning of class.
Do you think there's a way to keep that going post-pandemic, the ability to do that private chat?
Well, I've heard of some colleagues who've done it before. I think, it's going to require everybody to have a device with them, because that's the nice part of it. I had a colleague who said, oh yeah, all my kids have phones in the class. So I just open up like a Google form or something like that, where the students can chime in and throw something up, and that's fine. But you know what? Not all my kids have devices.
Right.
And
they don't necessarily, if it's on a screen at the front of the room, they're not as likely to write that comment or ask that question. I was that kid who was always terrified to ask a question out loud or to have to read out loud to the class. So I've looked at this distance learning personally as I wonder if when I was a kid, that was an option, if that would have been an easier experience for me, because it took me till I was in my 50s to go back and do the PhD. I did not see myself as student material, nor did many of my teachers in high school, for that matter.
we're obviously all online now too, but we encourage faculty to do, what is frequently called muddiest point with like 3x5 cards, right? So like at some point during the class or even on the way out of the class as we're preparing for the next one, just to write down, what was the muddiest point? What was the thing you really just don't think you get? Because a 3x5 is a pretty simple device. 3x5 card, that is.
How do you do that remotely though?
Yeah, well, that's the ticket. Remotely, not so much.
Oh, I
Well,
see. You're saying it's a solution when we do get back to the classroom. Right,
right.
of course.
Yeah.
I think it's really cool that some of the things that I'm an educator too, so I teach middle school science, STEAM, and humanities. But anyhow, I think there are going to be a lot of tools that we're using in the virtual space that we've discovered because of the pandemic, and we'll figure out like, wow, this was really effective, and I think this might be applicable to my in-person class, like my in-person class. And I think this would be, I'm hearing voices, just like you said, that I hadn't heard before,
Yeah.
that have really good, strong questions like, whoa, this child is amazing, because this particular platform works for them. So as an educator myself, I'm always thinking like, if and when we go back to in-person instruction, how can I take what I've learned with what works well in the digital space, and how can I use that in real life, or as my students like to say, IRL class, for sure. That's a really big thing for sure. Can I just throw out another question, because I'm dying to ask this question, Bob? Being a fellow of the NCORPS program, can you share with us what inspired you to go into education?
Oh, well, I was thinking about that today because I knew this was coming up. So I'll tell you, probably the most important thing in my life is my family. And so my wife and I are very blessed. We have 3 sons. They're 26, 21, and 17 years old. And I think there are a number of factors there. I think education was kind of the terms I use oftentimes are a push-pull. There was something pulling me into education. There was also something pushing me out of technology. The pull into teaching really started when my oldest was in 7th grade. And we ended up taking a family vacation, and somebody said, I'll shed one tear for you on this. My family was on vacation in Maui when 2 airlines went bankrupt within a week, and we had reservations to come back from the islands on one of those 2 airlines. So my son ended up missing 2 weeks of school. Okay. Then he came back and had spring break, and he had to get caught up. So I, with no training whatsoever, started teaching my son math. And by the way, my wife is an educator. Okay. She's an elementary educator, always has been. And she looked at me in about 3rd grade for her oldest, and she goes, I can't do this math anymore. It's up to you now, because I don't understand it. And so when my son's in 7th grade, he misses these 2 weeks of school, and I have to start teaching him. And the first 2 days, as any of you who have taught, and I suspect all of you have, that was not a pretty sight, because here I am thinking, oh, I'll just open the textbook and we'll just go through this together. And I soon realized I didn't remember this stuff. And so we're struggling together. And my son is like getting so frustrated, like, Dad, why don't you know this like now? And so I realized there was a little bit of this thing called prep. I really didn't understand that concept until that point. And so I did some prep, and later in the week, things went really well. And in fact, the things that would take us an hour early in the week were taking us 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes at the most. But then it was really that test that he went and took when he got back to school, because he missed 2 weeks. He missed a whole unit, or half a unit, I guess it was. And he went back and he took this test. And of course, I had no idea what was going to be on the test. I was just teaching him, right? And my son, who is not the most academic of kids, comes back with like a 92 or 96% on that test. And I'm like, wow, maybe I could do this. And so it was partly that, and it's partly that my sons were involved in athletics, baseball, football, scouting. And I started getting involved not only to help them, but also to help their friends involved in those programs and to see, and I know those of you who know this, you know that aha moment when you teach a skill and then your student executes that skill and they have this huge smile on their face and they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know I would be able to ever do such a thing. And that self-confidence is just oozing out of them. And it was those things that really started to attract me to teaching. And, you know, I tell people often, and I'm going to tear up on this because it just happens. When I was growing up, I always thought that as a dad, I was supposed to teach my children. I had no idea what they were going to teach me. And they do every day. And my students do the same thing for me. They teach me all the time how to be a better person, how to be a better teacher, how to be a better human being. And so that's what brought me into teaching.
That is so awesome. What were you doing before teaching?
Before I was teaching, I was working in high technology. I worked for 20 years. There was a little company based in Palo Alto. I think they're moving their corporate headquarters soon. A company called Hewlett Packard. Maybe you've heard of them. I worked there for about a decade, doing engineering work from software to hardware. I even know what a mass spectrometer is because I worked with them on the production line for 6.5 years. For those of you who are science people, you know possibly what I'm talking about. And then I worked in some project management as well at HP, their spinoff Agilent Technologies. I even spent a little time at a company in Sunnyvale, which is now part of Verizon, called Yahoo. So I had some experience there, but you know, it's funny. When I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, which we all do when we're in high school, we're like, well, what the heck am I going to do? My dad was having so much fun working at Hewlett Packard. It wasn't that I wanted to be an engineer. It's just I wanted to work at Hewlett Packard because he was having so much fun at what he was doing. And that really changed a lot in the 20 years that I was in technology. It became less about the personal connections that we were making, and it became more about the bottom line profit, how much money somebody's making in, how low are their expenses, and what do we do? And then sadly, I started to run into some, unfortunately, really nasty human beings. And so part of getting into education is about having my students know there's a different way to approach solving problems than just yelling at somebody or stabbing them in the back or whatever may happen. And that's part of who I am as a teacher as well.
Bob, I'd like to hone in on your dual role as parent and teacher because your story is magnificent and your kids are so lucky to have you, both your own children and your student children as a teacher. One of the things that has happened in this pandemic is that all of a sudden the role of parent has shifted when it comes to teaching. And it's no more about just get the children to school and pick them up. And parents are now really co-teachers in many ways in this process. So I'm wondering, Bob, how are you helping the parents of your students in their new role in this environment?
Well, and I've got to be blunt, it's a new world for me to help my parents understand that. So
all of us.
Yeah, I honestly don't think I've been doing a very good job of it, but I have had a few conversations. Probably the trickiest area is for our parents who have teens who have IEPs. And, you know, if you ever read an IEP, it always says that, you know, we want to sit the student away from distractions, sit near the teacher, you know, so the teacher can keep an eye on them. I think often of proximity, one of my favorite tools in the classroom. You know, you start looking over a student's shoulder and all of a sudden they're like, oh, the teacher's there, I better get to work, or, you know, I can get some engagement. And so the challenge is that now those things, those roles written in the IEPs now have become the responsibility of the parent.
Yes.
And it's like, has the case manager said to the parent, hey, listen, do you realize you've got to sit them away from distractions? You've got to make sure this, and I know that's not happening. And I recently had a conversation with a parent who was really blunt with me. She says, when I was growing up, it was my responsibility to learn. I never had any intention of taking care of all the micromanagement of my child's education. And now I'm almost being forced to do it, but I don't want to do it. I want somebody else to take care of it. And, part of it, I think, Anne, is that parents are starting to realize how hard teaching really is,
Yes.
right? And so, I can't say that, that's just like one conversation that I've had. And the tricky part is oftentimes the parents can't even be there. I teach in a school where we've got parents who are essential workers.
Right.
Talking about Leah and her exposure, I've got parents who are getting exposed every single day. They're healthcare workers and they're not at home. And so their children are literally left to flounder because they really don't know how to engage. And that's the thing that worries me most. We talk about, I keep hearing people talk about things like learning loss and the gap, the achievement gap widening. The achievement gap is widening because I can't be there. I'm now relying on a student to tell me when they're confused. I can't look at this quizzical face going, what the heck was the teacher talking about, or a blank sheet of paper, and know that there's some confusion. I now have to rely on a feedback mechanism that doesn't work. So I don't know if that directly addressed it in, but I think it gives you an idea of,
No, it
it's the
does.
challenges.
It is a challenge, and you're absolutely right. Parents have all of a sudden seen teachers in a whole new light. I remember seeing a post one time where a parent said to a teacher, "You lied to me. You told me my child was a good student, but it's not that way. It's not happening at home that way." And I'm sure, I mean, it's because it's just such a different learning environment for teacher, for student, for parents all together. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. You remind me of one thing that I read. I think it came out of the UK. There was a man who said, "I've just spent the first 6 hours working with my daughter in school, and I now would like to propose $250,000 a year for teachers
Yes.
because I just don't know how I would do it."
Yeah. And Dejan is all for that, right?
And the one that I really feel for, they're my colleagues who have small children at home.
Yeah.
And they're being teachers and parents at the same time in the same environment. And as I mentioned, I have older children. Basically I have 3 extra adults in my house. I don't know how my colleagues are doing this. And their kids don't understand why can't I go out and play with my friends? Why can't I go to school?
Jana has 3 young ones at home and she's teaching. So I think she's relating to what you're saying, and it's
But she's
not.
got a whole bunch of tools behind her. I'm sure she can figure something out with those tools.
That's the maker spaces that we build. Actually, we have like 186 of them out there in LA County so far, and some in Tennessee.
Yeah. I wish I could use one of these tools in here to fix some of the social problems and the social challenges that we're
Yeah.
facing. But you're right. I do have my own 3 children. Both my husband and I are educators, teaching virtually. And sometimes the little ones have to fend for themselves. And every now and then we get a call like, so-and-so hasn't showed up to online class in a day or 2. We're like, oh no. So, I mean, I parents out there, I feel it. Yes, I am a teacher on the other side of that Zoom call trying to educate children. But at the same time, I'm also that parent that is trying their best to manage with the resources and the constraints that exist. So I think so I just keep telling myself, we're all going to come out of this stronger, like more creative solution, creative problem solving. The children, my own students, are demonstrating to me the resilience of humanity in a way that I have never seen before. So I am the hopelessly optimistic one of the group. In the midst of the super real challenges that we're facing in terms of this healthcare crisis, in terms of it's an educational crisis when it comes to equity. I think as a whole, I hope we all learn from it and come out stronger and come out with some really creative solutions in the future. Just saying.
And I'm going to also add right now, I think we may come out more empathetic.
That is a huge hope that will have an impact. Because the question that was bubbling up for me was about whether you see in parents and colleagues a forgiving kind of atmosphere, because I do see it in the philanthropic world with other nonprofits, with even landlords, and not that they're giving us any major concessions, but they're very patient and understand that this is a new reality, and we're all working hard to make sure that we're able to survive this to the other end, wherever that other end is going to be. But I wonder if you see that in parents and other teachers.
Well, I can't really speak for the parents other than myself and my wife, because I don't see a whole lot of other parents, other than occasionally I might see one of my wife's parents, because she sets up pickup bags out in our front yard once a week so that her students, she teaches first grade, they have to have books. So she rotates the books every week. So the students stop by on Sunday, pick up their, or parents do, and pick up their new supply of books and materials. My wife has sent home painting materials with large pieces of construction paper so she can do art at home with her children. And I love that. And so, but from a teacher perspective, I think there's a lot of empathy going on. I know, at least in my colleagues, meeting at my high school, I'm hearing teachers say, we're looking at the way we're grading. We're looking at the fact, one of the biggest challenges that we run into as educators is we've, kind of historically relied on kind of these high stakes tests that we give, and there's one right answer. Well, now they can cheat. Well, gee, now maybe I have to go back and rethink and give them an authentic assessment, which might be really hard to grade. But you know what? I'm really going to know a lot about what those kids know how to do when we get done with that. So I think that's forcing that discussion to happen a little bit more. And I think there's some empathy of the teachers knowing, hey, this is hard for me. This is hard for the parents. It's hard for my students. And we're providing as much as we can, some support, at least in being empathetic, giving extended deadlines, opportunities for redemption on assessments and things like that. So I see a lot of that happening. And certainly, I mean, in my practice, that's frankly nothing really new for me, but it's something that just keeps going on.
Yeah, I do hope that empathy is a result of, like, the stronger empathy is a result of what we've all experienced, because we've all needed patience. We've all needed to offer patience.
Yep. And with the students too, one of the things that is, gosh, where was I going with this? The students, I guess I tell my students and my parents this often: the people who come into my room are human beings first and students second. And if we keep that in mind, I feel like there are times where I'm getting a better humanistic connection with my students. Now, one of the things I do in my classroom is I'll have one-on-one Zoom breakout rooms with my students. And one of the beautiful things about that is I get invited, and this is in a very professional sense, okay? I've been invited into people's bedrooms. And the thing that's amazing about teenagers in their bedrooms is that they have amazing things on their wall that really speak to who they are as people. I've discovered some amazing artwork on walls, and then you ask about it and you get invited into the conversation about who am I? Why do I have these things on the wall? I discover students who have an accent wall that's all very brilliant purple. I'm like, gee, is purple your favorite color by any chance? And so it's been very interesting, and on the teacher side, we have teachers who've run into problems with dogs coming into the pictures or small children coming in. And so we're actually, we're getting to know each other a little bit more personally than I think we ever have before. And it's a little bit strange, to have a teenage teacher say, yeah, I've been into a few of my students' bedrooms. People are going to go, is this guy a little creepy? But it really is in the sense of I'm getting to know them as human beings. And I actually like that a lot. I really do like that.
It also speaks to where they're most comfortable. So the fact that they're sitting in a room that is their room, they're totally surrounded by their presence, that they can open up a little more to you. And Bob, I hope that that there are plenty of other teachers like you who have your attitude. I have found this so refreshing. I think Dejana, as sad as it is, we are actually out of time. And before we say goodbye, I have to apologize for the fact that I think the very beginning may have been cut off because I am the tech today. And I think I pushed the wrong button, but we've been on since 3 minutes into the show. So
Good to go. What can I say? Thank you, Bob, for sharing your insight. Thank you, Anne and Mark, again, for joining the conversation. I'm Dr. Dejana Figueroa. I'm here with Dr. Leah Haynes. This was another episode of Teachers for Teachers. That's you moms and dads. And we look forward to you joining us for the next one.